I'm Monica. I'm sitting in my car, the engine off, and the quiet of the night has settled around me like a thick blanket. The envelope lies on the seat beside me, a silent witness to the events that just unfolded. It's filled with a check for $100,000, a sum that represents years of my hard work, countless sacrifices, and what I thought was my unwavering love for my sister Lily. The reception hall was behind me now, its lights and music fading into the distance. But the sound of Lily's panicked calls still rang in my ears. Just a little while ago, I was standing in that hall, feeling more like an outsider than a part of the celebration. The vineyard was bathed in the warm glow of late daylight, rows of grapes stretching as far as the eye could see, and the air was heavy with the scent of roses and fine wood. I took a deep breath and stepped into the registration line, trying to calm my nerves. The woman at the table hardly looked at me before reaching into a cardboard box and pulling out a cheap, laminated piece of paper. Limited guest, it read in stark letters. There was no gold edging, no fancy ribbon, and no elegant calligraphy. It was just a sorry excuse for a badge, more like something used for a factory tour. I stared at it, waiting for her to realize the mistake, but she just set it down and moved on to the next guest. The woman behind me beamed as she received a gold-trimmed lanyard with her name written in beautiful script. She slipped it on as if it were a precious jewel. I picked up my pitiful badge. Its edges were already curling in the heat. For a moment, I wanted to ask why, but then I felt a heavy hand clap my shoulder. It was Leo, Lily's arrogant friend. His suit was a bit too tight around the middle, and he had that wide, mocking grin on his face. "Guess they finally figured you out," he said loudly enough for the couple beside us to hear. They smirked at me, and I felt my cheeks burn. I wanted to say something, but the words just wouldn't come. I pinned the flimsy badge to my dress, feeling as if it were branding me. As Leo walked away, still chuckling, I forced myself into the hall where the music was playing, and the celebration was in full swing, but it felt like it was happening without me. I leaned against the wall, and my hand found its way into my purse. My fingertips brushed the smooth envelope that had been there for weeks. Inside was that check, a result of all my overnight shifts at the hospital, all the holidays I'd spent away from home, and all the vacations I'd postponed. When I first put that check in the envelope, I imagined handing it to Lily with pride, thinking it would be a bridge to the closeness we once had. But now, with that stupid badge pressing into my skin like a scarlet letter, the envelope felt more like a ransom than a gift. I closed my eyes and saw all the nights I'd come home exhausted, peeling off scrub uniforms that smelled of antiseptic. I remembered promising myself that all these sacrifices would be worth it, that one day, I'd be right beside Lily as she walked into her future. But now, I wondered, was it really worth it? Lily hadn't even looked for me when I entered the hall, and Leo's laughter still echoed in my ears. The sight of the envelope took me back to a time when our lives were completely different. I was 22 when we got the news. Our mom and dad were simple farmers, working hard on our small family farm. They were kind-hearted, hard-working people. Mom was always cooking up delicious meals, and Dad was always fixing up the old farm equipment. But one fateful day, a drunk driver hit Dad's truck head-on. Overnight, our small farmhouse became filled with a heavy silence. Lily was just 16 then, curled up in a chair with her knees to her chest, sobbing. Leo was pacing back and forth, ranting and demanding answers that no one could give. I knew I had to be strong. I told Lily that I'd take on extra work at the local diner until I found something more stable. I promised her that she wouldn't have to leave school, that her world could stay the same, even if mine had to change. It started small. I gave her my room, telling her she needed space to study, while I set up a cot in the corner of the living room. When she wanted to take art classes, I signed up for double shifts at the hospital, even though my shoes were falling apart, and my feet ached with every step. Every holiday became just another day at work, and my life became all about making sure Lily had everything she needed. By the time she was applying to college, I had a second job on the weekends, earning just enough to cover the expenses that scholarships didn't. Leo never understood my sacrifices. He always sneered at the extra hours I worked, calling me a martyr whenever the bills were paid on time. "You like being the hero," he'd say, as if I'd chosen this burden instead of it being something I couldn't escape. But he never once offered to help. I told myself it didn't matter. What mattered was that Lily was happy and on her way to a bright future. I convinced myself that I could pick up my own life once hers was secure. But then, a few months before her wedding, I met Ava. Lily insisted we meet at a fancy cafe that smelled of citrus and expensive linen. I would have preferred the small diner near my apartment, where I knew the staff and the coffee was always hot. When I walked in, Ava was already sitting there. She had an air of elegance about her, and her handbag was placed on the chair beside her like a precious companion. She greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a smile that made me feel like she'd already judged me and found me lacking. After the waiter brought our drinks, she leaned in and said, "It's truly remarkable how you've helped cover the wedding venue deposit. So generous, especially considering your salary as a nurse." Her words were sweet, but there was a sharp sting behind them. I forced a laugh, the kind I'd practiced to hide my humiliation. I told myself I'd heard worse. But what really bothered me was Lily's reaction. Her lips tightened, and then she gave a faint smile. She didn't defend me, she didn't even change the subject. She just watched Ava with a look of admiration, almost hunger. As the months passed, I noticed the changes in Lily. Her voice started to take on Ava's clipped and deliberate cadence. She began making small, precise gestures, as if every movement was rehearsed. On the phone, she was all business, her tone cold and unfeeling. I told myself it was just the stress of planning the wedding, that she didn't have time for warmth and affection. The weeks leading up to the wedding were filled with small reminders of where I stood. When the rehearsal dinner schedule came out, my name wasn't on the list of speakers. I asked Lily if she wanted me to prepare a toast, something simple about family. She hesitated just long enough for me to understand the answer before saying, "We thought we'd keep it short. Too many voices get messy." Her tone was the same polished, rehearsed one I'd heard from Ava. At the wedding ceremony, I sat in the third row, tucked behind distant cousins and family friends. I told myself it didn't matter, that all that mattered was seeing Lily looking beautiful in her wedding gown. But as I watched the bridal party, I couldn't help feeling like an outsider, like I was just a spectator rather than a part of the family. Even our conversations had changed. We used to talk about her favorite books, her dreams, and our silly inside jokes. But in the months before the wedding, our calls turned into lists of payments due, deadlines, and vendor confirmations. Her gratitude felt more like an obligation than real affection. Every time I hung up, I told myself it was just the stress of planning, that once the wedding was over, things would go back to normal. Back at the reception, I drifted over to the seating chart. I scanned the rows of names, table after table, family grouped with family, friends with friends. The groom's relatives took up the first two lines. I looked down to the end and then back up, slower this time. My name wasn't there. I stood still, waiting for it to appear, for there to be some mistake, but the truth stared back at me, steady and undeniable. I had no place at any table. Waiters passed by with trays of champagne and delicious food, but no one even glanced my way. It was as if the badge on my dress had made me invisible. I found a spot behind a column wrapped in white fabric and lights, from where I could see the head table. Lily looked radiant in her lace gown, leaning towards her new husband, her smile wide and carefree. People were raising their glasses, and laughter filled the air. Across the room, Leo caught my eye. He was already looking at me, his glass raised in a mock salute. His grin grew wider, as if my exclusion from the table was a private joke he was sharing with everyone. I dropped my gaze, not wanting him to see the pain on my face. And then, without really thinking, I walked towards the gift table. The envelope in my purse felt like a heavy weight. The gift table was in the corner, covered in white linen, with shiny bags tied with satin bows and cards stacked in gilded boxes. I found my plain white envelope with my sharp handwriting. It was untouched. I stood there for a moment, my fingers hovering over it. I thought about all the hard work, all the tired mornings, and all the missed vacations. That $100,000 was a lifetime of sacrifice. Before I could change my mind, I picked up the envelope and slipped it back into my purse. A hush rippled through the room. I could feel people's eyes on my back, and a murmur spread like a gentle breeze through leaves. But no one said a word to me. I straightened my back, lifted the strap of my purse higher, and walked towards the door. My heart was pounding, but my steps were steady. The music and laughter from the hall were trying to drown out the sound of my retreat. And then, I heard my name being called. It was Lily, her voice sharp and panicked. I ignored it at first, but she called again, louder this time. I kept walking, the gravel crunching under my heels. The cool night air wrapped around me like a cloak. Lily called out again, and this time, I could hear the rustle of her dress against the stone. I glanced back and saw her, her gown lifted in both hands, the train dragging behind her, her face pale in the soft glow of the vineyard lights. For a split second, the old feelings of love and protection pulled at me, but I turned away. I quickened my steps, feeling the weight of all those years of sacrifice pushing me forward. In the parking lot, I fumbled for my keys. My hand was shaking only a little as I unlocked the car. "Please," Lily shouted, her voice breaking. I paused for a moment, the sound cutting through me like a knife. But then I opened the car door, got in, and closed it. The world outside became muffled, and her voice faded into a faint echo. I drove out of the vineyard, the lights and music disappearing in my rear view mirror. All that was left in front of me was darkness and the silence of my own breath. When I got home, I sat in the car for a long time, looking at the envelope. My phone kept buzzing, but I didn't have the strength to face the people on the other end. I powered it off and carried the silence into my house. That night, I made tea but didn't drink it. I sat at the kitchen table, looking at the pool of light from the lamp. The quiet was heavy, but it was mine. I went to bed without answering any messages. The next afternoon, my friend Rose called. She sometimes worked as a wedding planner's assistant. Her voice was cautious, almost apologetic. "I thought you should know," she said. And with those words, everything I'd been trying to hold together fell apart. She told me that in the original seating chart, weeks ago, I was supposed to be at the head table, right beside Lily. It was clearly marked in green ink. But 4 days before the wedding, Ava requested changes. My name was moved to what she called the overflow section. And the final draft had Lily's check mark, her silent approval. I thanked Rose and hung up. My hands were shaking. The betrayal hit me harder than I'd expected. It wasn't just Ava's doing. Lily had seen, agreed, and let it happen. A few days later, the phone rang again. It was Lily. Her voice was heavy and tired. "We can't book the honeymoon without your check. The deposit is due tomorrow," she said. I listened to the silence for a moment. She rushed to fill the silence. "I didn't mean for things to turn out this way. Ava said the seating was tight, and I thought it didn't matter where you sat. Please, I need your help," she pleaded. My throat tightened, but my voice came out calm, steadier than I felt. "If I ever give again, it won't be a gift. It will be on my terms, clearly written out, with conditions. No more one-sided sacrifices," I said firmly. There was a soft intake of breath on the other end, followed by a faint sob. I let the silence sit between us for a moment, then I ended the call. That evening, I put on gloves and took a box of bulbs to the garden near the fence. The soil was soft from the last rain. I knelt down and planted deep purple tulip bulbs, the same kind Lily used to call princess flowers when she was little. But this time, I was planting them for myself, for the part of me that had waited too long to be seen and appreciated. As I patted the soil back into place, I felt a sense of peace. The silence, which had once felt like a wound, now felt like a promise of a new beginning.